Hello, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Jewelry Design Department doing a tutorial for mechanical drafting. The purpose of this tutorial is to discuss what we covered in class, how to do layout and explore just basic three-dimensional space using a technical study. No drill drawing tools will be used. This is all freehand work. In the case of this tutorial, it's freehand work on a computer, but it's freehand work nonetheless. Okay, we had begun by doing a few specifications. We wanted to have a center stone that was going to be 9 by 12, 12 by 9. So I am going to set that. That's the maximum. And actually, I think for this piece, I'm going to be copying, once again, the piece we did in class, Alex's piece. I think that actually a 9 by 7 is going to be more appropriate. Maybe even an 8 by 6. I'm going to do an 8 by 6. That's close enough to get us started. Okay, that's reasonable. All right, so now I'm going to start drawing the detail that we worked on in class. The first thing that he had is he had the false bezel. Going around his stone. And since there's no real benefit to doing this small, I'll go ahead and zoom in. That's going to force me to adjust a few things, so bear with me. It would be so nice if this particular function had a keyboard entry, but it doesn't. And then for my oval, go ahead and do a couple of reference points. Okay. And then adjust its location. So I know it's centered up as I draw. Close enough for jazz. Okay. So once again, this is our 54 millimeters, more or less, in length. I'm going to come in and draw the false bezel. With the wonders of computer technology, I can do a fairly quick and symmetrical job of that. But it is still my wrist. I'm still drawing. It's using a pressure-sensitive Wacom tablet and stylus. and using a software program that has a mirroring capability. So it'll mirror my efforts all the way around. Okay. All right. I've got to be careful not to get too caught up in detail work here. That's clear enough to give you a sense. Of what it is I'm trying to do. Okay, and then he held it with 4 claws. Like so. His ring was basically it was a static shank width. Something like that. It has a slight taper, but that's fine. And then he had a scalloping pattern. That he repeated. Now remember we discussed in class that basically halfway from the center to the end here, somewhere in there, more or less is going to be halfway down the finger. So there's not a real reason to go further than that with this detail. I'll extend it a little bit. Clean it up. Using my grid as reference so I can tell that I'm keeping my distances consistent and whatnot. It is a sketch. It's only a study. It's not a technical drawing. So now these elements actually broke beyond the shank. He did not, in his design, resolve what would happen here. So I'm just going to bring it to a point. Good enough. And then these scallops were actually cushioned to create kind of a marquee shape. And And here we go. And that gives us a pretty good facsimile of what we were looking at in class. It could always be fussed with more. This was a little thinner in the student's design work. And we had pyramids. Centered up. In the middle of each one of these. At least that's how I interpreted it when I revised it and simplified it a little. I am working actual size, so I am going to need a fairly refined brush size to tackle these details. And of course, it's a computer. I can zoom in. For those of you who do work on a computer, you have to be careful about zooming in. Because you start putting in details that only a dog can hear, and that's a waste of time. If the difference won't show up on a printout, you're only doing it for your own amusement. Now, it would be good to do something with the shank here that mimics or speaks to what was happening with the rest of the design, so I'll do that. Yeah, that's enough. Zoom back out. In essence, that's the design that we worked on in class. Okay? I am going to repeat this design. I think his shank was a little wider, but for our purposes, this is fine. I'm going to now carry down the information into a front view. Clean up the ends of this a little bit. All right. Moving down into the front. Oh, oops. I bet. I have to turn off the horizontal mirroring. Okay. Do that again. somewhere in here will give us an accurate length. First thing I want to do, like I did in class, is to create a basic elevation for the entire thickness of the shank. And I'm going to put that at somewhere in that area. Okay. And then I want to draw a straight line across. Actually, I'll hold off on that. Okay. Actually, the first thing I want to do is bring down some construction lines. When you are sketching your design, and also when you're actually doing full-blown technicals, what you're looking for to carry into the next view are corners. Either an outside corner like this, or an inside corner like this. Okay? Down in here. Okay? So anywhere you have an inside or an outside corner, you want to have, that's information you can carry. That's useful information you can bring down. So I can carry down that information. Oops. I can carry down that information. I can carry down the inside corners. I gotta remember not to do that. Okay. Asks an interesting question as to why there's a much wider distance here than there is here, when in the design they should be roughly similar. It's inaccuracy. I'm sketching. These lines aren't really lining up exactly where they're supposed to go. This one should actually be a little more into this corner. This one should be a little farther out. So I notice that. I notice that I am tracing the same information down and getting some squirrely results. And I'll correct that down in the front view. The flat front view. Okay? And then I actually do want one that comes right off. Aside from corners, whenever something goes around and then turns away from the point of view, remember, this is the eye here, looking up into here. Okay? So, as this turns around and you lose the other side of it, the silhouette, the boundaries of things, can also be carried down. They would be visible from that view. So I'm going to grab the very edge. It's very close to the other mark, but there's a slight difference, so I'll let that stand. And the edge of the stone will do the same thing. The girdle, as it goes around, leaves us a silhouette. Alright, that's all of the corners, except for the pyramid, which I'm not going to do right now because it would just get confusing. I missed one. A couple of them, actually. This. I was more careful placing that one, and you can see how much of a variance there is. And this. Okay. There. That's all the information I can bring down except for the prongs and the pyramids. Oh, there's the end piece. I'll bring that down too. The end of this point. There. So that's the information from the front, from the top view that I can carry down. I will go ahead and make that more permanent. With the dark color. Now as I do these, I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit to balance them. Make them look like they are symmetrical. It's okay that this one's actually a little wider overall. That doesn't bother me. That's actually part of the pattern tapering and getting smaller as it goes down. Now I'm not going to do anything with this line because it's the girdle of the stone, and the girdle of the stone is above this elevation, so it actually won't be useful. Okay, I've done that. I'm going to take that away. So I've brought down everything I can from the top view except for the pyramid information and the prongs, the stone setting information. Now I want to establish elevations. The elevations, there's nothing in the top view that tells me what elevations. I mean, I can set them kind of however I want. There are some things that imply. It feels as though these are below and these are above. So I'm going to go with that. To me, it makes sense that the pyramids are raised and not sunk in, but they could be the other way around. This false bezel, it could be the same plane as this, or it could be higher, but the fact that I drew it crossing it implies that it's higher. So I am going to draw it at a slighter higher elevation. Okay? I'm wondering if the whole thing isn't a little thick. I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll decide that later. So I'm going to start putting in elevations. And the elevations are up to me. They're my creative decision. I carried down all the important mathematical stuff from the top view that I could. So now I'm going to be creative and bring in an elevation. And the elevation I want is between the tops of these recessed puffs, which I think are the same elevation as the outside of the shank. That's my opinion. I think that these and these and these are all the same elevation. I think that's my elevation number 1. Okay? I think this component is elevation 2. Okay? And I think that the under bezel, the false bezel, I should say, not under bezel, the false bezel would be a 3rd elevation. Okay? Boom, boom, boom. So, Being convinced that that's how I want to do it, I'm going to move ahead. So what I've just done is declared my first elevation. Okay? And my first elevation are these things. The stone itself, the baskets, I mean the false bezel, that's a different animal. But that's what this line indicates. All right, I'm good with that. So I need to do a little bit of cleaning up. Because that line doesn't go all the way across. It doesn't cut in front of this element, for example. So since it doesn't cut in front of that element, I'm going to erase it. Same here. And same all the way across here. Okay. It does run the entire length of the shank, so I'll leave it there. However, what doesn't run the entire length of the shank is this top elevation. This elevation. Okay. That doesn't run all the way. It ends right here, if you'll recall. So, that line will stop at that point. All right. And question would be, this line, does it continue all the way to the top of this, or does it only continue across this lower elevation? It only continues across the lower elevation. So I'm going to erase it. Where it crosses into the upper elevation. Same would be true of that corner. That line. Because it ends, it comes into here. Follow the little floating dot. It comes into here and then it stops. It doesn't keep going up onto the top. And now you're starting to get a sense of elevation, elevation, elevation. Clean things up a little. All right. So, as we already mentioned, this line comes to here, but it would not continue over the edge of this because the edge of this is in front. The eye is going to strike into that first. Okay, oh, I made a mistake and drew that on a layer. I shouldn't have. Okay. Comes into here. But below that, it stops. There. First elevation, second elevation, all the way across. Now, we've already determined that we need to have a separate elevation for the false bezel, because that line crossing over the top of that elevation implies that it's higher. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. However, a big part of that, where I'm going to put that false bezel, is where the stone is going to land. So I'm going to draw the front view of my stone. I'm going to sketch it, and then I will draw it more cleanly. So the width, is from there. Okay. The depth is roughly half of this distance. I'm going to put in a line for my girdle of my stone. Sketch that in. And so roughly half this distance is equal to what it will be in depth. So I can actually visualize a circle. And if I do that, this is going to be equal to that, or half the width. So I'll sketch my point there. And then the table is half of that, so I can visualize what half of that is. The crown, I should say. We're not going to get into crown angles and table dimensions, but something like that, a little more beefy on top, is going to be good. So now that I've got that, I'm going to draw it clean. Give it a little more height. And then I'm going to reinforce the girdle a little bit. And that's that. Clean up my drawing. Get rid of some of those sketchy lines. Fine. So that's my stone. So I want to be able to use that independently of everything else, so I'm going to take a minute and create what is known as a gel layer out of this. Just makes it so that it's transparent. As you're about to see. So I'm going to pass that through. I want to have a nice bit of space at the bottom. It does look like I've made this maybe a little thicker than it has to be, but I'm okay with it. I'm alright. Something like that, I'm going to say. Okay? So it's time for me to make the elevation for the false bezel. And remember, I discussed in class that you want the false bezel fairly close to the girdle. Like that. I know the width of the false bezel is here. And I know that this elevation line is not going to come across. This is taller and it's in front. The eye hits it first. This is in front. So this elevation is not going to impact this at all. I can erase it. Alright. So that's the elevation for the false bezel. Now I have the little pyramids. I'm going to put in a construction line to use as a reference, so I make them all the same. And I want them to float just a little bit above this main elevation. Which will put them very close to the same elevation as the false bezel. I didn't know that would be the case, but it is. So now I will draw my pyramids. So now I need to bring that information down. The center line is going to line up with the center of the other outside corners. You could visualize that without having to draw it. I'm drawing it to be clear. The outside edge, inside edge, outside edge, inside edge. And the outside of this final pyramid. All right. Having that, I can now draw the pyramids. We want them symmetrical, okay? We want this pyramid, the center, to be in the middle and them to be roughly the same size. So, but that looks like it's already happening for us. There. Oh, still have one more. Okay. So now we have everything done except for the prongs. Cleaned up the pavilion of the stone because we didn't need to see that anymore. So now I'm going to bring in the construction lines for the prong work. The outside of the prong is the same as the outside of the false bezel. the inside comes to here. And the width of the prong straight in front and straight in back is like that, roughly. So, draw my prongs. Oh, my bad. Coming straight off the false bezel and reaching up onto the crown of the stone. Coming straight up off of the false bezel. Now I want the elevation of the prongs to be the same, so I'm going to look at where that comes across. I could draw a construction line, but I can just as easily eyeball it. And eyeballing whenever you can is a very good thing to do. It saves time. Clean up the drawing a little. Okay. That is the completed drawing, flat top, flat front. I will continue another tutorial if I get the chance to show you how to wrap this up onto the round. Okay? I hope that proved helpful. Okay.